Okay, so pollination is when you take pollen and it lands on the stigma, and the stigma is the female part of the female reproductive part of a flower. So this receptive area could be like a platform. It might secrete some kind of liquid so the pollen catches onto it, or it might have like a rough kind of feathery texture to kind of catch that pollen. But pollination is when pollen lands on that area. So we also have pollinators with the aid of like insects, bats, and other animals that can do this. Water can help pollinate, as well as wind. Self-pollination can occur, and it does, they think, roughly 25% of the time. But if the stigma is receptive, because it's not always, then what's going to happen is that the pollen grain is going to bulge at the aperture. And the aperture is just this kind of like pore where the pollen tube's going to come out of. I'll show you a way better pic of the aperture later on when we talk about the difference between You Dicots and monocots. Okay, so something that's very unique in angiosperms is called double fertilization. And what happens is that the pollen grain, remember it's got the two dinucleate in it, well, one of them's going to lag behind and turn into two sperm cells. And so when you have a pollen grain with its tube, the tube nucleus here, and the sperm, then technically that is the mature male gametophyte. But this is like obviously a electron microscope picture showing how this is the stigma, like this blurry on the outside, and then these dark pathways, that's the pollen tube making its way down to the base of the style. So there are two sperm here. Eventually the pollen tube's going to enter that embryo sac inside the female gametophytes. Destroys the synergids that are hanging out by the micropyle, and then discharge its contents. Now it's got two sperm, and both of them do have a function. One of the sperms will unite with the egg, form the zygote that will turn into the embryo sporophyte. The other sperm is going to fuse with the two polar bodies that are in the middle of the ovule, and they'll form a triploid primary endosperm nucleus, indicated as 3N. So it's a triploid. This is a diploid. So this is why they call it double fertilization. You got two sperms, one will fuse with the egg, the other one will fuse with those two polar bodies. Now that primary endosperm is going to rapidly divide and turn into just an endosperm tissue, because before it was just a nucleus, and now it's going to go through multiple rounds of division and become tissue. And endosperm provides nutrients for that young embryo in most flowering plants. Okay, so that's basically the life cycle of an angiosperm. After double fertilization, you get a young embryo that's going to turn into a sporophyte. So I guess let's just start with pollination here. So here's the pollen. They land on the stigma. They travel down the style, form in a pollen tube. They will eventually reach the ovule of the female gametophyte, destroy the synergids. We have two sperm here. One will fuse with the polar nuclei, the other one with the egg. And then we go through double fertilization. We have a zygote. The endosperm nuclei will go through multiple rounds of mitosis to become the actual endosperm. You can see it's triploid here. The embryo is growing and developing. I'm going to talk about these two little baby leaves here coming up. But when conditions are right, the seed will germinate. We get our young sporophyte, turns into an adult sporophyte that has both male and female reproductive parts, and then the whole process will start over again, where on the female side inside we have the megaspore mother cells that will create 8 nuclei in 7 cells or whatever, and then on the male side inside the anthers you get the formation of pollen. So in angiosperms there are 2 ways to classify them. You can classify them as You Dicots or monocots, and it has basically everything to do with the first leaf, the cotyledon that emerges from the seed. So You Dicots have 2 of these little baby leaves or cotyledons, and monocots only have 1. So some examples of You Dicots: trees, shrubs, snapdragons, mints, peas, sunflowers. Monocots tend to be more of the grass families, palms, orchids, irises. All monocots share a common ancestor with the You Dicots, so it's probably You Dicots emerged first, and then monocots from the You Dicots, most likely. Some other key differences, how you can tell, because you may not always be there for the seed germination. You can look at their leaves. If they are netted, if they have netted veins, then it's a You Dicot. If it's parallel, if you think like corn or grasses, then it's a monocot. If it has flowers, you could count the petals or the flower parts, and if that number is divisible by 4 or 5, then it's You Dicot. If it's divisible by 3, then it's monocot. Now that's not always the case, because like if you have 12, if you came across 12 petals, that doesn't help you. Okay. The pollen. So in You Dicots, they have 3 pores, that aperture on the pore. Monocots only have 1. With You Dicots, you get secondary growth like lignin and bark and like a thicker base. And monocots, that you hardly ever see that. And then finally, inside the arrangement, the xylem and the phloem are arranged in a ring, and here they're just kind of scattered throughout. So to show you some pictures of this, here's the pollen grain. This is Dicots with the 3. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. This picture shows the 2 baby leaves right here, 1, 2, and then they talk about multiple parts. Venation, and you can see it's arranged in a ring. Another difference is that dicots usually have tap roots. Monocots, there's the 1 pore, 1 baby leaf, parallel veins. You can see they're just kind of spread throughout, and fibrous roots. All right, review question. In some seed plants, how does the sperm move toward the egg? D, pollen tubes. What is the smallest proportion of mitochondrial protein genes and the closest living relative to the earliest angiosperms that is thought to have come from horizontal gene transfer? It is C. Yep, 1 copy of 20 out of 31 known mitochondrial protein genes. Name the 3 main structures of the flower. So, ovary, stigma, style. These are all parts of the female. There are also male parts. Carpel, stigma, ovary, those are still female parts. We also need to include males. This one? Well, why? Well, guys, what's the receptacle?
Oh, it's the same.
No, what's the receptacle?
It's what, something to do with I know what it is.
It's the base that everything attaches to. Right, the petals, the male parts, the female parts. So it's C. You got the base, and this is also part of that base. Stamens, they're male parts. Carpel, female parts. Okay, so C. Name parts of the flower that attract pollinators.
Is it B?
It is D, petals and nectaries. All right, lots of reading on this one. I'm recording. Select the correct explanation of double fertilization in angiosperms.
Is it B?
Why do you say B?
Because it goes along with double fertilization. I don't know. I just read
Two
it.
sperm and then two pollen.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. It is B. Okay. You could have eliminated C and D because they have 1 sperm and 3 sperm, and then what's the difference here? Forms a zygote. The other. Oh yeah, 3 versus 2. Yep. All right, moving on to seeds. So I'm going to talk about 4 ways in which seeds aid in survival, kind of give it an advantage or an adaptation, and then list some environmental conditions that lead to seed germination. So there are 4 ways that seeds protect the embryo, and these are the 4. Dormancy. So if conditions are not right, we can just wait it out until conditions do improve. Protection. Seed coat's pretty hard, and so that young plant on the inside, it's very vulnerable to, environmental conditions, so it kind of protects it until it's ready to, lose that seed coat and emerge. Inside the seed, we also have stored food, aka endosperm. So the young plant can use that food, those carbs, the amino acids, before the leaves emerge from the ground and carry out photosynthetic activity so it can make its own food. And finally, probably one of the most important ones, adapted for dispersal. Okay, moving on to germination. So seeds, they don't really contain a lot of water, between 5 to 20%. And one of the reasons why they do germinate is that you water them, so that way they absorb more water and it kind of cracks open the seed coat. But if conditions are stable, where that water percentage doesn't change, the seed will just kind of pause on growth as well as metabolic activity until it does get water. But if it doesn't have it, where it's like dried, then it just kind of slows down, and the what am I trying to say here? The shelf life of that seed remains viable for a longer period of time, and they have come across seeds that are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old.
Tuesday, we have Knowledge Bowl. Would you be okay taking my chemistry students and just having them watch the ACT stuff with you?
If I do it.
Oh, you don't know if you're going to do it?
No, not yet.
All right, then I won't plan on that.
Okay. I don't know if I want to start it because Shane and Amber wouldn't be present. So. What?
Yeah, she said that.
I said that. All right, so there has to be a certain amount of water and oxygen in order for germination to occur. Some seeds do require specialized germination, like that has to be exposed to heat, so maybe a forest fire runs through it. Leaching of inhibitory chemicals from the seed coat, so if it's exposed to a lot of water, it kind of washes away or leaches those chemicals out of the seed coat so it can germinate. And some actually have to be eaten by an animal, so that way the digestive system weakens the seed coat, and then it also aids in dispersal because when it comes out, hey, it's got a nice pile of fertilizer to germinate in. So, all right, that does it for seeds.
Awesome.
Yeah, one more section. Review question: true or false? The embryo stops developing after double fertilization in angiosperms and after single fertilization in gymnosperms.
True.
It's true. It is true. All right, fruits. So identify the structures from which fruits develop and then distinguish among berries, legumes, drupes, and samaras. So one unique thing about angiosperm is fruits. It has fruits and flowers. And fruits aid in dispersal because we like to eat fruit. Animals like to eat fruits. So the carpel, which is also the ovary of a flowering plant, is made up of 3 layers called the exocarp, the mesocarp, and the endocarp. So starting on the outside and working your way in, those are the 3 layers. So here, the tomato here, the skin is the exocarp, and then the fleshy part's the mesocarp, and then the endocarp would be the lining inside of that fleshy area. And these layers, they can vary in texture and thickness and whatnot. Leading to why some fruits are very, very diverse. Another unique thing about fruits is that you basically get 3 genotypes in one package. So you get the fruit and the seed coat from the prior sporophyte generation, the organism that made it. You also get the embryo for the next sporophyte, and then you also have the endosperm, which is a triploid. And these seeds are, they're very, very diverse. They can range from being fleshy to soft to dry to like hard, when I think about acorns. I don't know. One of my 7th graders this past week, because we were talking about, I don't know why we were talking about fruit, but we were. And so then he said, wait a minute. If tomatoes are fruit, then is ketchup a jelly? And I was like, well, in jelly, you add pectin. And I'm like, you don't add pectin to ketchup, so I'm going to say no.
He's on the right track.
Yeah, he is. I feel like he's like a dad trapped in a little kid's body because he's got the worst corny dad jokes ever.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Okay, so fruits allow these angiosperms to colonize large areas. If it has a fleshy covering, it might, like birds or other vertebrates might help it disperse to other areas. Hooked spines, like cockaburs, they cling on to mammals and fur and your dog and your clothing, and they basically hitchhike to other places. Some seeds might have developed like wings, if you will, so like maples, we're like, oh, they look like a helicopter seed. Some seeds float. They're buoyant, so like coconuts. They float and travel to other places. Now there are 6 types of fruits, and I've grouped them into 3 groups, so 2 for each group. The first one is your simple fleshy fruits, okay? So true berries and drupes are underneath this umbrella of simple fleshy fruits. And how they develop is that you have a single pistil composed of 1 or more carpels, So with true berries, the entire pericarp, that includes the exocarp, the mesocarp, and the endocarp, is fleshy. And inside, you're going to have multiple seeds in more than one ovaries. So you can think of like each one of these little pockets as an ovary. And you can see that there are multiple seeds within them. So tomatoes, blueberries, cranberries, grapes are included in as true berries. Drupes have a hard pit in the middle. So one single seed, and then each layer of the pericarp has a different structure or function. So like the endocarp is actually going to be the hard, covering the pith, if you will. And then you have the mesocarp and the exocarp that we eat. So the exocarp's the skin, and then the mesocarp's that fleshy part that we tend to eat. So peaches, plums, cherries, walnuts, almonds, and pecans are also drupes. With nuts, we actually eat the seed inside of the pit instead of the fruit. Okay. And I know I'm using the word pistil here. The pistil includes the stigma, style, and the ovary. So the top part of the female, the stem that connects it to the ovary. So that's simple fleshy fruits. Moving on to the second group called compound fleshy fruits. This includes aggregate and multiple fruits. So how compound fleshy fruits come about, there's two ways. That fruit develops from the flowers with one or more pistils, or from one or more flowers. So the aggregates come from one or more pistils or one or more ovaries, and they don't fuse. True berries, they do fuse, but in aggregates, they're separate. So when you take a look at this raspberry fruit, you can see that it has these bumps. And each one of these tiny little bumps is an ovary that is separate on its own. Whereas with the tomato, it fused together and, they're kind of like all connected to each other. So blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, they are aggregate fruits. Multiple fruits, okay, we're going to have individual flowers form. So here's a pineapple, and you can see all these tiny, these purple petals or flowers, and then that actually turns into the fruit. Okay. So, pineapple, figs, and mulberries. And the final slide is called dry fruits. Legumes and Samaras. So legumes are like beans and peas. So here are the three tissue layers, the exocarp, the mesocarp, and the endocarp. They don't thicken. When it's mature, the pericarp is pretty much dried, so you can dry these. They also can be stored in a pea pod, and then you can split that carpel open. So. And then the Samaras, they don't have a split like they do with legumes. And then it has a wing. So, maples.
Students are now dismissed to second hour. Students are now dismissed to second hour.
This is the last slide. I do have some review questions, but, here's what it is. So.
This is when you can you go back to the slide where there's allow annual service to
What? This one?
Yeah, thanks.
Question about this while I'm in here. How would I like start this? I know I would use 185 grams of magnesium, but like, what am I trying to convert it to?
No. You're starting with that, and you're trying to get to that. Because this is your actual, and you need to figure out your theoretical.
Oh, so I would convert the milligrams to CL all the way over to that one.
The MgCl2 to magnesium, yes.
Okay.
All right, so review question. Did
And
you
then
get?
can you go back to the first slide of seeds? Yeah.
Send me the Traverse soil and water one again. I seem to have misplaced it.
No problem.
Just email that to me. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
He is so funny to me. I'm almost done.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk awkwardly about review questions. All right, select the statement that is not correct concerning fruit. Okay, it's not A, because they do add a layer of protection. B, co-evolved with seeds and gymnosperms. I don't know. Gymnosperms don't produce fruits. Fruits aid in seed dispersal, that's correct. It's got to be B, because gymnosperms do not have fruits. In a peach tree, where is the embryo? Where do we find that seed? It is C, in the pit of the fruit. Which of the following statements about flowering plants is not correct? Animals help them enhance sexual reproduction. Okay, well that's kind of true. Animals can aid in pollination. Animals help them disperse the next generation. That's also true. Flowering plants produce fruit. That's true. A major innovation of flower plants is the seed. Well, angiosperms produce seeds, but there's another group of plants that produce seeds as well, and that is the gymnosperms. So it is D. Which of the following statements incorrectly describes how angiosperms benefit from seeds? All right, let's look at A. It provides the capability of stopping development under unfavorable conditions so it can proceed with under favorable ones. That's true. Affords maximum protection to the young plant at its most vulnerable stage of development. That is also true. Provides the young plant with a safe supply of nourishment. That is true. All of the statements are correct. Well, that's got to be D again. All right, thanks for tuning in.